The legal arguments for the Menendez brothers' release. The Menendez brothers, Erik and Lyle, were convicted in 1996 for the murder of their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, a case that has sparked significant debate over the years. The primary legal arguments for their release center around claims of childhood abuse and inadequate defense during their trial and the evolving understanding of psychological trauma. According to the brothers, they killed their parents out of self-defense after years of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse by their father. However, this defense was not fully presented in their original trial, leaving a significant gap in how the case was understood by the jury. One of the most compelling legal arguments for their release involves the claim that their trial attorneys failed to present crucial evidence regarding the abuse. The defense team did not adequately cross-examine expert witnesses or present psychological experts who could testify about the impact of the abuse on the brothers' mental state. This omission, supporters argue, resulted in a trial that was fundamentally flawed. Since the original trial, the legal landscape regarding childhood trauma and abuse has evolved, with greater awareness and acceptance of psychological conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and battered person syndrome, BPS, conditions that may have affected the brothers' ability to make rational decisions in the heat of the moment. Another critical aspect of the case is the public's evolving understanding of trauma. In the years since their conviction, a shift has occurred in the way courts and society view the psychological impact of long-term abuse, especially on young people. New studies on trauma victims have underscored how deeply abuse can affect a person's decision-making abilities, sometimes leading them to commit acts of violence in an attempt to protect themselves. Supporters of the Menendez brothers contend that this was the case for Erik and Lyle, and they argue that their actions, while undeniably violent, were influenced by years of abuse that went unrecognized at the time of their trial. Additionally, critics of the trial argue that the jury was not provided with enough information to understand the brothers' mental state fully. Legal experts suggest that had the jury been made aware of the full extent of the brothers' trauma, the outcome of the trial might have been different. Given the advancements in psychological research and the broader societal understanding of the effects of abuse, it's possible that a modern jury would view the case through a different lens. In recent years, there have been efforts to petition for the brothers' release or a reduction in their sentences. Legal experts argue that the brothers' conviction does not adequately reflect the psychological trauma they endured, and the justice system's failure to consider this at trial warrants a reevaluation of their sentences. These arguments have been bolstered by growing support from psychologists and legal reform advocates who argue that the criminal justice system should adapt to better account for trauma, particularly when it results in violent acts committed by those who have been severely abused. The impact of public opinion on the Menendez brothers case. Public opinion has played a significant role in shaping the Menendez brothers case, both at the time of their trial and in the years since. When the brothers were initially convicted in the 1990s, they were largely viewed by the public as spoiled, entitled young men who killed their wealthy parents out of greed. The media portrayal of the brothers as selfish and ruthless criminals contributed to this negative perception. However, over time, public opinion about the case has shifted, particularly as more information about their abusive upbringing and the psychological effects of that abuse has come to light. In the years following their conviction, documentaries, interviews, and books about the case have presented new perspectives on the brothers' actions. These media efforts have highlighted the possibility that the Menendez brothers were acting in self-defense after enduring years of physical and sexual abuse at the hands of their father. As awareness of childhood trauma has grown, so too has the public's sympathy for the brothers. Many people now question whether their actions were truly premeditated or the result of a psychological breakdown caused by years of suffering. The media's portrayal of the case has shifted from focusing solely on the gruesome nature of the crime to exploring the psychological context behind the brothers' behavior. Documentaries like The Menendez Murders, Erik Tells All, and various podcasts have played a key role in changing the narrative, offering a more nuanced view of the brothers' motivations. The public has become more divided on the issue, with some supporting the brothers' release, arguing that they should not serve life sentences for crimes committed under duress, while others feel that the brothers should not escape the full consequences of their actions, regardless of the abuse they claim to have suffered. The shift in public opinion is also reflected in online petitions and the efforts of various advocacy groups, who have called for a new trial or clemency for the brothers. Public opinion in this case has been a driving force in pushing for a re-examination of the case, with many arguing that the justice system should acknowledge the impact of abuse in sentencing. Supporters of the Menendez brothers often draw parallels between their case and other criminal cases involving abuse victims, highlighting the importance of considering the psychological effects of trauma when assessing criminal responsibility. Despite this growing support, there remains a vocal contingent of individuals who believe the brothers should remain in prison. These individuals often argue that no amount of abuse can justify murder and that the brothers should not be given special treatment simply because they claim to have suffered at the hands of their parents. They argue that the justice system must uphold its commitment to punishment and accountability, regardless of the circumstances that led to the crime. Legal precedents and the potential for clemency. The question of whether the Menendez brothers might be granted clemency hinges on several legal precedents, including the evolving standards of justice, particularly regarding childhood abuse and trauma. Clemency is typically granted when there is a compelling reason, such as new evidence, or if the original trial was flawed in some way. In the case of the Menendez brothers, their supporters argue that their trial was flawed due to the failure to present evidence of the abuse they suffered, as well as the lack of expert testimony on how that trauma may have affected their behavior. Legal precedents involving cases of severe childhood abuse have helped inform arguments for clemency in the Menendez case. In recent years, there have been instances where individuals convicted of crimes under similar circumstances, where abuse played a significant role, have been granted reduced sentences or released on the basis of new evidence or legal arguments. For example, cases like that of Cyntoia Brown, a young woman who was sentenced to life in prison for killing a man who had sexually exploited her, have prompted a reevaluation of how the justice system treats individuals who commit crimes as a result of abuse. Brown's eventual release after serving over a decade in prison was seen as a reflection of the changing views on criminal justice, particularly the recognition of trauma and abuse in sentencing. In the Menendez brothers' case, advocates for clemency point to the fact that psychological trauma was not properly considered in their original trial, a failure that may have influenced their sentences. They argue that clemency or a sentence reduction would be an appropriate response to the evolving understanding of trauma, particularly given the advancements in psychological research since the trial. Furthermore, the Menendez brothers' time in prison, during which they have shown efforts toward rehabilitation, is also presented as a factor that could influence the decision for clemency. The potential for clemency in the Menendez case may also be influenced by broader trends in criminal justice reform, including the growing focus on rehabilitation over punitive measures, particularly for individuals who have committed crimes due to psychological distress. With increasing recognition of the importance of considering mental health and abuse in sentencing, the legal landscape may be more receptive to the brothers' claims of trauma-induced actions. The Menendez brothers' time in prison and their rehabilitation efforts. Since their conviction, Erik and Lyle Menendez have spent over 2 decades in prison, where they have been involved in various rehabilitation efforts. Over the years, both brothers have shown remorse for their actions and have worked on improving their mental health and social behavior. Erik, in particular, has been described as a model inmate, actively participating in educational programs, therapy, and rehabilitation efforts. He has reportedly taken steps to address his emotional and psychological issues, participating in anger management courses and individual counseling. This commitment to rehabilitation is cited by many of the brothers' supporters as evidence of their transformation and the possibility that they have been rehabilitated to the point that they no longer pose a danger to society. Additionally, the Menendez brothers have expressed deep remorse for the murders, even while maintaining their claims of having acted in self-defense. Their supporters argue that this remorse, coupled with their efforts to address their mental health issues, makes them candidates for release. The brothers' time in prison has also allowed them the opportunity to reflect on their past actions and take responsibility for the harm they caused. Advocates argue that their rehabilitation efforts demonstrate a capacity for change and that continued incarceration may no longer be necessary. However, critics of the Menendez brothers' release argue that rehabilitation cannot undo the severity of their crimes. They contend that the brothers should not be released simply because they have shown remorse or participated in rehabilitation programs. For these individuals, the gravity of the crime outweighs any claims of rehabilitation, and they believe that the brothers should serve their sentences in full.